So this call came in on a Wednesday. New client saying he urgently needed his home office set up for a video conference the next day, connect a printer, set up cloud storage, install antivirus and VPN. For me, that was a normal on-site visit, maybe 2 hours of work, but he immediately offered double if I came that evening. I work from home doing IT, and that month money was tight, so I agreed. I wrote down the Oak Street address. We settled on 6 o'clock, and he reminded me twice how critical tomorrow's call was. Normally, before I leave for a job, I text my friend Kevin the client's name, address, and time. He does the same for me. We both do a lot of home calls, and a few years back he got stuck with a drunk client who blocked the door. So we made this rule: always tell the other person where you are, and if you don't check in later, they start calling. It's our cheap version of a panic button. That evening I was behind schedule. A remote session overran, my laptop needed a restart, and I was already watching the clock. I shoved cables and tools into my backpack, told myself I'd message Kevin from the car, and rushed out. Traffic was worse than usual. GPS kept yelling about alternate routes, and I was mentally going through the job: printer, cloud, antivirus, VPN. So I didn't notice until I was already turning onto Oak Street that I'd never actually sent him anything. I thought about pulling over to text him anyway, but I was already a few minutes late, and I hate showing up late to first-time clients. The house itself looked pretty standard. Single story, neat yard, lights on, garage door half open with a car inside. Nothing about it felt off. I locked my car, grabbed my bag, walked up, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, like he'd been standing right behind it. Guy around 50, maybe a little older, polo shirt, glasses, tired eyes but big smile. "You must be Daniel," he said. "I'm Robert. Thanks for coming so fast." Handshake was firm, normal. He stepped aside, let me in, and led me down a short, quiet hallway into a small room that had been turned into a home office. Desk, desktop PC, 2 monitors, printer on a side table, shelves with neat rows of folders. He kept talking about the conference as I unpacked my laptop. "It's tomorrow morning, early," he said. "If this doesn't work, I'm dead. I need secure access. I need my documents backed up. I need the printer working." I told him it was all doable, asked for the Wi-Fi password, and started with updates and basic checks. Most clients wander off at that point to make coffee. Robert stayed in the room, standing behind me or sitting in a chair right next to me, watching the screen and asking what each step was for. About 20 minutes in, while I was installing the VPN client, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not random creaks, not pipes. Actual steps, steady and heavy, moving past the door toward the other end of the house. I paused, hand on the mouse, and looked over. Robert didn't move, didn't even glance at the hallway. "Is someone else home?" I asked. He flinched, just a tiny jerk of his shoulders, then said quickly, "No, just you and me. Old place, the pipes make noise when the heating comes on." The answer was way too fast, like he'd practiced it. I've worked in a lot of old houses. Pipes hiss, bang, rattle, but they don't walk past your door in shoes. Still, arguing with a client over his own house wasn't going to help, so I just said, "Okay," and went back to work. On the surface, I was focused on drivers and updates. Underneath, I was suddenly very aware that nobody knew I was on Oak Street with this guy who lied that smoothly. 10 minutes later, door clicked in back. Robert said he'd check window and left. Voices. Then he returned. Said was his brother. And I kept setting up cloud storage, listening. Footsteps in the hallway again. Slower this time. Like whoever it was didn't want to be heard, but also didn't care enough to really hide it. They came closer, one by one, and stopped right outside the office. From my chair, I could see the shadow under the door. narrow strip of darkness where someone was clearly standing. Robert's eyes flicked down, saw it too, and he stood up so fast his chair bumped the wall. "Mark, everything's fine," he said, raising his voice a little, looking at the door instead of me. "It's just the computer guy. We'll be done soon, okay?" He forced a little laugh that didn't sound natural at all. The shadow didn't move. For a few seconds it was just silence. No answer, no more footsteps, just someone on the other side of that door listening. Then, finally, the shadow shifted and moved away, steps retreating down the hall. Robert waited a moment, then sat back down, but he didn't look at me. He stared at the monitor like it was suddenly very interesting. "My younger brother lives with me," he started, talking a bit too quickly. "After an incident a few years ago, he doesn't like people in the house. He has this obsessive thing, controls his space, gets very nervous when someone new is here." He said it like he'd rehearsed that explanation, probably for doctors or social workers. I asked if his brother needed us to move to another room, or if this was actually okay. Robert shook his head. "No, it's fine. He just needs time to adjust. He's not dangerous, just anxious. Usually I don't invite anyone over when he's home, but today I didn't have a choice. The conference tomorrow is too important." He added, "If you hear anything else, just ignore it, please. It's better if we both pretend he's not there." That made the double rate make sense. It wasn't just because of urgency. He knew having a stranger in a house with an unstable family member was going to be awkward and stressful. I get mental health stuff, I've had my own anxiety issues, so I told him, "It's okay, I'll work fast." But inside, I was counting every remaining step of the job, mentally checking off tasks, and trying to see how soon I could realistically get out of there, without rushing so much I'd make mistakes and have to come back. I pushed through the rest of the setup faster than I normally would. I installed the antivirus, finished the VPN configuration, and started syncing his cloud folders. Robert seemed to relax a little now that most of it was done. He started chatting more, telling me about his own work as a remote consultant, how this conference could decide a big contract. I nodded where it made sense, asked a couple of technical questions to keep things moving, but my focus kept drifting to the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing there again. Twice I saw that same thin shadow under the door, unmoving for long seconds. Once I heard quiet breathing, slow and close, like someone had their face near the gap. When I finally stood up to check the printer connection on the other side of the room, I turned slightly, and my eyes landed on the door. There's a small crack between the door and the frame, just enough to see a slice of the hallway if someone is right up against it. In that narrow gap, I saw an eye. Just one eye, staring in, unblinking. My heart dropped so hard I felt it in my legs. I snapped my gaze back to the printer, forced my hand to stay steady, pretended I hadn't seen anything. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the movement as the eye disappeared and the shadow pulled back. A second later, the footsteps started again, going down the hall, away from us. I didn't say a word to Robert about it. From the first lie about the pipes, to how reluctant he'd been to admit his brother was even there, everything about his behavior told me this was a situation I did not want to get more involved in. If his brother really did have serious issues, confronting it could set him off. If it was something else entirely, I didn't want to know. The safest option was to finish, keep things polite, and leave as soon as I could. So I sped up the handover, walked Robert through the cloud backup, showed him how to start the VPN, printed a test page, and asked if he had any final questions. He paid me in cash from an envelope he pulled out of a desk drawer, thanked me a few times, and walked me back to the door. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck go up as we passed the hallway, like someone was watching from one of the darker doorways. but I kept my eyes straight ahead. Outside, the air felt different. I said goodbye, got in my car, and locked the doors before even putting the key in. Then I just sat there. For about 5 minutes I didn't start the engine, just tried to slow my breathing and stop my hands from shaking. When I finally pulled out my phone to text Kevin, it hit me that I'd never sent him the address, or even told him I was doing an on-site visit that night. If something had gone wrong in that house, nobody would have had any idea where to even start looking for me. The story is told in the first person by a man whose friend disappeared without a trace while hiking the Appalachian Trail 4 years ago, and he is still living with that trauma and guilt. In July 2019, 4 of us from the same ad agency in Boston went on a 5-day hike along the Appalachian Trail. Kyle, Martin, Sarah, and me. We all wanted to get away from the office, away from clients and notifications, and the stupid glass doors of our building. We weren't amateurs. We'd all done weekend trips. We had decent packs, first aid, maps on paper and on our phones. The plan was about 70 miles in 5 days, staying at official campsites. Nothing risky, nothing off-trail. The first 2 days went almost annoyingly well. Good weather, nobody twisted an ankle, nobody complained much. On the trail, we talked about coworkers, petty office drama, who was secretly dating who. At night, we cooked simple food, checked the map for the next day, and were in our sleeping bags stupidly early. Kyle was in his element, usually in front, calling back jokes, taking photos of everything. Martin was our navigator, checking the map even when the blazes were obvious. Sarah kept calling us corporate campers whenever one of us checked our phone for a signal. On the evening of day 2, we stopped at a wooded campsite just off the trail, one of the marked tent areas. There were a couple of other tents farther in the trees, but we didn't really see the people, just their bear bag line and a faint light. We pitched our 2 tents, hung our food, filtered water. Martin built a small fire in the ring. I boiled water and threw together some instant pasta. Kyle was in great spirits, cross-legged by the fire, telling stories about weird clients and doing impressions. Martin started messing around on this tiny harmonica he'd brought. Sarah laughed at all of us and filmed little clips on her phone like it was some team-building retreat. Around 10 p.m., after we'd eaten and just sat around for a bit, Kyle stood up and stretched. "Gonna step into the woods," he said, tapping his headlamp. "Bathroom, obviously." I barely looked up, just said, "Don't fall in a hole," or something equally dumb. He snorted, turned, and walked into the trees. 10 minutes went by. The fire burned lower. Martin's harmonica stopped. At some point, I realized I hadn't heard him coming back from any direction. I checked my watch and called, "Kyle?" into the dark, half joking. No answer. Sarah tried louder. Still nothing. After another 5 minutes, the mood shifted. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and walked a little way into the trees where he'd gone, calling his name again. Martin watched me, then stood up and said he was coming too. We agreed Sarah should stay at camp in case he came back from some other angle and needed to see the fire or hear someone there. Martin and I moved slowly in an arc around camp, sweeping our beams, calling every few steps. No flash of his headlamp, no, yeah, I'm here. I tried calling his phone. It didn't even ring, just went straight to the out-of-service area message. Reception on the trail is always bad, but you usually get at least a half ring. That dead air bothered me more than it should have. We searched like that for about an hour, widening the circle but staying aware of where the campfire was. No sign, no sound, just normal forest noise. Eventually we went back. Getting ourselves lost on top of everything would have been useless. Sarah's face when we stepped out of the trees told me she already knew we'd found nothing. We talked it through. It was late, visibility was terrible, and the trail wasn't simple. We decided to keep the fire going, lie down with our boots on, and start a proper search at first light. Maybe he'd gotten turned around and would walk toward us at dawn. None of us really slept. Every twig snap made me sit up. At first light, we were already up, stuffing a little gear into day packs. We left a note at camp for Kyle, marked the spot on Martin's map, then spread out within shouting distance and started combing the area. We tried to cover roughly a mile radius, checking side paths, low spots, anywhere he could have slipped or sat down. Around noon, we ran into 2 park rangers coming up the trail. Sarah practically jogged at them. We told them everything: time he left, direction, what he was wearing, that he wasn't drunk, wasn't upset, nothing like that. They radioed it in and told us to stay at camp while they organized a search and rescue team. By that evening, there were over 20 people out there with dogs, running proper grid searches around our campsite. They stayed out until dark. They didn't find him. The next day, it ramped up again. More people, more dogs, a helicopter doing passes. They checked ravines, streams, every side trail. Same result. No Kyle, no clothing, no tracks they were confident enough to call his, no call from a road where he'd ended up. On the 3rd day, someone radioed that they'd found a backpack. We were told to stay put, but news traveled. It was Kyle's, about 1.5 miles from our camp, just lying on the trail like he'd stepped out of it. Inside were all his things: wallet, documents, phone, food, even clothes. Nothing looked scattered, nothing ripped. The dogs followed his scent to the backpack and then just stopped. After that point, there was nothing for them to track. Ranger Jim, the older guy who seemed in charge, talked to us later. He suggested Kyle might have gotten lost at night and panicked, seen a light in the distance, the moon through the trees, another campsite's fire, maybe even distant headlights, and gone toward it. In panic, he said, people can walk several miles in one night without noticing the fatigue. Maybe Kyle had dropped his backpack to move faster, to feel lighter. It made a kind of sense on paper. It just didn't explain where he went after that. The searches kept going for another week, then into a second. They brought in helicopters again, drones, volunteers from nearby towns. They checked every section of forest within about 10 miles. Kyle was never found. Police questioned all of us in detail. Our stories matched. No argument, no weird behavior. We were all together until the moment he stepped into the woods. Kyle's family hired a private investigator who worked the case for a month, chasing anything that looked like a lead. Nothing. Officially, the file stayed open as a missing person. A year later, geologists studying the area discovered under the trails a network of hidden caves with narrow sinkholes camouflaged by leaves, moss, and roots. Some of the sinkholes they found were only 2 or 3 feet wide, but up to 50 meters deep. Rangers said you could step on what looked like solid ground and just drop straight down. They thought a lot of the missing in that stretch of trail, around 20 people over 30 years, might have gone into those caves. Teams went into a few of the wider openings and found remains that matched 3 names from the old missing list. Not Kyle. The rest of the caves were called too narrow and unstable to enter, basically saying he might be there but no one was going to look. It has been 4 years now. The first 6 months after we got back, I saw Kyle everywhere. Any red-headed guy in a crowd made me look twice. A laugh with the same tone would hit me, and I would snap my head around before I even processed it. My brain kept pasting his face onto strangers because it could not accept that someone could step away from a campfire and just not return. Out of the 3 of us, Martin broke down the worst. He kept saying we should have pushed the Rangers harder, should have stayed out all night with flashlights. He started drinking more. At first, it was a couple of beers to sleep, then whiskey most nights. He began missing deadlines, coming in late, or not showing up at all. About 6 months after the trip, the agency let him go. I paid part of his rent for a while because watching him lose his place on top of everything else felt like too much. Around the 1-year mark, he moved to another city, took a warehouse job, and told me he needed to be where people did not look at him like he had killed someone. Sarah tried to keep working at the agency, but it did not last. She hated how people lowered their voices when she walked by, and how every new hire eventually got told about the coworker whose friend went missing on a work trip. Clients would ask if she was doing okay now in that careful tone people use when they think you might break. About a year after everything, she quit. She moved to another state, sent one short email saying she needed distance, and left the group chat. No social media posts, no calls. She just disappeared from our lives. It felt wrong and sudden. I stayed in Boston and stayed at the agency because the routine was the only thing that made me feel stable. But I do not hike anymore. I sold my gear piece by piece that first year because every time I opened the closet and saw my pack, my stomach locked up. Sometimes Kyle's parents call. His mom sounds like she is holding her breath. They ask if I have remembered any detail from that night. I have not. I was the last person to see him. He stood up, joked about going into the woods, turned on his flashlight, and walked into the trees. I do not know if he is alive somewhere, or if he dropped into one of those caves and is still down there. I only know there are answers in those mountains that I will probably never learn. I still have nightmares where I sit by the fire, try to say don't go, and nothing comes out. I watch him fade between the trees until I wake up shaking. 4 years later, and the guilt hasn't faded at all. During the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I was home on break when this massive July storm hit our neighborhood around 6 a.m. Thunder shook me awake hard enough that for a second, I thought something had exploded on our street. The windows were rattling in their frames and the rain sounded like somebody was dumping buckets on the roof. I reached over to grab my phone and the screen was the only light in my room. I tried the lamp switch out of habit. Nothing. Got up, hit the light in the hallway. Nothing there either. The digital clocks in the kitchen were just blank, dark squares, and the AC was dead. Even the Wi-Fi router that always had that tiny blinking light was completely off. I checked out the front window and saw it wasn't just us. The whole street was dark, and the next one over too, all the houses just sitting there with their blinds closed and no porch lights. A couple cars went by slow with their headlights on, picking through branches and trash cans that had blown into the road. It was that weird feeling of being awake when you know most people still aren't, and knowing I was the only one home made it feel even more off. My parents had left around 5 to get to work in the next town, and my older brother had gone to crash at a friend's place the night before. Normally, I liked having the house to myself. That morning, it just felt extra quiet. Around 9, when the storm had finally moved on and the rain turned into this light drizzle, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. She said they still had power at work and asked if everything was okay at the house. Then she wrote that when they were leaving earlier, they'd heard some kind of loud crash up by the roof, like maybe a big branch or something, and she wanted me to go outside and take photos of the roof from different angles and send them to her. She was worried about missing shingles or a tree limb that could cause a leak later. It sounded reasonable enough, and I didn't have anything better to do without Wi-Fi anyway. I threw on shorts and a t-shirt, grabbed my shoes and went outside. The air felt heavy after all that rain, and our yard was a mess of little branches and leaves. I walked around the house slowly, trying to find spots where I could see as much of the roof as possible. I had to step into the neighbor's side yard a bit to get one angle, and there was nobody out to complain. I held my phone way back, tilted it up, snapped picture after picture of shingles, gutters, and the big maple tree that always makes my dad nervous during storms. I zoomed in on any place that looked even slightly weird, just in case. When I went back inside, I sat near the front window for better light, looked through the photos, and sent a bunch of them to my parents over mobile data, trying not to think about my battery percentage. A few minutes later, my mom texted back saying thanks, and that she'd shown them to my dad. Together, they decided to call Jack Morrison, the local roofer who'd fixed our back gutter a couple years before. I remembered Jack as this sunburned guy in his 40s with a beat-up white work van and an actual company name painted on the side. Mom said he'd try to swing by around noon to inspect the roof and give an estimate if anything was damaged, and she asked me to let him in and show him around if he needed access from inside the house. The rest of the morning dragged. With no power, I was trying to avoid opening the fridge too much, and I didn't want to waste my phone charge scrolling on data. I ended up sitting in the living room by the front window with a paperback I'd been meaning to finish for months. Every so often I'd glance up when I heard a car, hoping it was Jack's white van, but it was always somebody else creeping through the neighborhood checking on storm damage. Around 12:30, when he still hadn't shown up, I figured he was probably slammed with calls and running behind. It made sense. Half the town had probably lost shingles. By 1:30, I was starting to get a little annoyed, but not worried, just bored. The house was stuffy without the AC, and the only noise was the occasional branch dropping from somewhere or a distant chainsaw a few streets over. I texted my mom that Jack hadn't come by yet, and she replied that he'd probably gotten delayed and to just keep an eye out. He'd show up when he could. I put my phone face down to save the battery and went back to my book, trying not to think about how long the power might be out. Around 2 in the afternoon, just when I was debating going out to sit on the porch for some air, there was a firm knock at the front door. It startled me a little because nobody had rung the bell all day. I set my book down, walked over, and did what my parents always drilled into us. Check the peephole first. Through that tiny circle, I saw a red Ford F-150 parked in our driveway instead of Jack's white van. 2 men were standing on the porch. They looked like they were in work clothes, one in dirty jeans and a gray polo with some small logo stitched on the chest, the other in a black t-shirt and worn work boots. The guy in the gray polo was holding a tablet tucked against his side, and the other guy had a small notebook and pen in his hand. What I didn't see was any ladder, any toolbox, any of the stuff Jack had brought last time when he fixed the gutter. No extension ladder on the truck, no bundles of anything. Nothing in the truck bed except maybe a cooler and some random junk. That stuck out to me right away. Roof people always show up with gear. Still, it was broad daylight and they were in a truck, not walking up from the street or anything, so I unlatched the deadbolt but kept the screen door locked as I opened the main door. The man in the gray polo smiled like we already knew each other and started talking right away in this friendly practice tone. He said they were from Midwest Insurance and that they'd been sent out to do storm damage assessments for all the homes in the neighborhood after the outage. He kept calling it standard procedure after a weather event, like he'd said that exact line 100 times. The whole thing hit me wrong as he talked. My parents hadn't said a word about any insurance company sending someone by. All they'd mentioned was our usual roofer. I told them my parents had called a roofer to check the roof, not an insurance company. I kept my voice calm on purpose because my dad always said people show more when you let them talk. The guy in the black t-shirt jumped in fast, almost talking over his partner. He said they worked together with local contractors, that insurance comes first to assess and photograph everything. Then the roofer shows up later for repairs. It sounded sort of reasonable, and I didn't really know how claims work, but that uneasy feeling stayed with me the rest that afternoon. The man in gray lifted the tablet a little and said they should also inspect the ceilings from inside, just to check for fresh cracks or leaks from the storm. He talked about water getting in around vents and light fixtures and not showing right away, which sounded like something an expert might say. Still, the tablet screen was completely dark. He hadn't turned it on once. I stayed behind the latched screen door and asked if they had IDs, company papers, or even business cards I could text to my mom. That felt like a normal request to me. For a second, they just stared at me in silence, then glanced at each other with this quick look I read as annoyance more than confusion. The guy in gray forced his smile back on and started patting his jeans, checking each pocket like he'd misplaced something. He said, "Hang on, I should have a card here somewhere," and turned halfway toward the truck. That's when I added, casually on purpose, that our roofer should be here any minute, and I could call him right now to ask about the insurance process, since I had his number saved already from when he fixed our gutter before. The reaction was instant. The guy in the black shirt didn't look at me, just said sharply to his partner, "Forget it, not worth it." The gray one turned back with this stiff smile and said they'd mixed up the address, that they actually needed Maple Street, not Oak. Before I could answer, they were already heading down the steps, moving fast to the truck. Both doors slammed, the engine roared, and they tore off down our quiet street, way over the limit. My hands shook as I locked every door and texted my parents everything, as clear as possible. About an hour later, a van with Morrison Roofing and Repair on the side pulled into our driveway, and Jack climbed out in a safety vest with a tool belt and ladder. I still checked the peephole before letting him in. Once he stepped inside, I told him about the insurance guys from earlier. His face went serious, and he said he'd heard of people using storms as cover, going door to door pretending to be inspectors so they could get inside and steal, or pressure homeowners into contracts. While he checked the roof, I called the police non-emergency line. That evening, after Jack left, a cop came by and took my statement. We stood at the doorway while he wrote down the truck, their clothes, the insurance name, and what they'd said. He told me there had been similar calls about people posing as inspectors or electricians after the storm, but without a plate number or video, it would be hard to track them. Months later, I never heard about them being caught. Now whenever anyone comes, I call the company, confirm the name, photograph the license plate, and send it to my parents before I let them in. Last winter, I picked up a second job working nights at a 24-hour self-service car wash. I only took that job because I desperately needed money to fix my transmission. I already had a day job at a warehouse, but the repair was going to cost like $2,000. The car wash gig was pretty simple. I sat in this tiny booth, took payments from the rare customers who paid cash, handed out tokens for the wash bays. Most people just used their cards at the terminal by the bay, so mostly I sat alone scrolling through my phone and occasionally checking that the equipment was working. Place was on a highway between two small Texas towns. Gas station about a mile down, a couple 24-hour diners, nothing else really. Shift was midnight to 8 a.m., and I'd been doing it for about a month without a single incident. Boring but safe, or so I thought until that night. The night started normal. I clocked in a little before midnight, grabbed a coffee from the machine in the booth, did my usual quick walk around to look for busted hoses or trash in the bays. Everything looked fine, cameras were up, lights were on, compressors humming like usual. First few hours I had maybe 3 cars, all quick in and out, nobody wanting to make small talk at that hour. I answered a text from my warehouse supervisor about swapping shifts, watched a couple of dumb videos, and mostly fought sleep. After 2 in the morning, the quiet changes. It feels heavier somehow. You start noticing every little sound. The fan in the booth, the click of the bill acceptor resetting, the distant rumble of trucks out on the highway rolling past in the dark. It was particularly quiet that night. Maybe 5 people total came through the whole shift. Around 3 in the morning, I was starting to doze off, head dipping over my phone, when this guy walked into the booth and asked for $20 in tokens. He looked mid-30s, buzz cut, wearing a faded work jacket with some construction company patch on it. Hands were rough, nails dark, like he actually worked with them all day. His eyes were red in that worn-out way you see on night workers, but he didn't seem drunk or high or anything. Nothing weird about him, just a regular tired worker. I gave him the tokens. He nodded, paid with a 20, didn't say much else, just a quick, "Thanks, man," and walked out and got into a dark pickup truck. I watched him pull away from the booth and drive over toward bay number 4, the farthest one from me. From where I sat, that bay was half hidden by the vacuum island and a support pillar, so once he pulled in I could only really see the rear of the truck and the glow from the bay lights. I saw his brake lights come on, then shut off, and that was it. I went back to my phone, figuring he'd be out there the usual 15 or 20 minutes like everyone else. Maybe 10 minutes later, I heard the pressure washer kick on. That high-pitched whine, then the rush of water hitting concrete, and then it suddenly cut off. Like, less than a minute. Just a burst, and then silence. That was strange because usually people wash their cars for a while, especially if they just bought a bunch of tokens. The timers are set so you get a decent amount of time per token, and he'd asked for $20 worth. I glanced at the little monitor that showed the bay status lights. Number 4 was still green, which meant his session was active. I waited another minute or so, listening for the gun to start again, but it stayed quiet. No sprayer, no coins clinking into the machine, no movement I could hear through the walls. I figured maybe the equipment broke down, and I didn't want the owner getting calls in the morning about refunds and "your machine ate my money." So I zipped up my jacket, grabbed the flashlight we kept by the register, and headed out to check it out. When I walked up to bay number 4, the first thing that hit me was the truck just sitting there with the driver door wide open, engine idling, and no one inside. Exhaust was puffing out steady, headlights throwing light across the wet concrete and up onto the cinder block walls. The pressure washer gun was lying on the ground in the middle of the bay, hose stretched out and water still dripping from the nozzle into a little puddle by the drain. No one ever leaves the gun like that. They hook it back on the holder without even thinking. I stepped closer and leaned into the cab. Empty. Keys in the ignition, dashboard lit up, gauges steady. A dirty work bag sat on the passenger seat, hard hat on the floorboard, some crumpled paperwork shoved up against the windshield. There was even a half-finished gas station coffee in the cup holder. I straightened up and called out, not yelling at first, just normal volume. "Hey man, you out here?" No answer. Just the hum of the ventilation fans in the other bays and the low hiss of the truck idling. I tried again, louder this time. "Sir, you okay?" Still nothing. My first feeling wasn't fear, it was concern. Maybe the guy felt sick. Maybe he got dizzy and sat down somewhere, or slipped on the wet concrete and hit his head. We were far enough from town that if he needed help, I was the only one there until some random customer pulled in. I started searching the property, going bay to bay and leaning into each stall, still calling out, "Hey, you here? You okay?" I checked behind the vacuums, walked around the back of the building where the wall meets the scrubby grass, looked by the dumpster enclosure, even checked the little gravel strip where trucks sometimes park to clean out beds. Nothing. No movement. No voice answering back. Just my breath fogging in front of me as I walked. I went to the bathrooms, pushed both doors open, flipped the lights on, checked the stalls and corners. Both were empty and unlocked from inside, like nobody had touched them all night. This made no sense whatsoever, and a weird feeling started rising from my gut. Something here was very wrong. I went back to the booth and was reaching for my phone to call my manager when a police cruiser turned in and rolled slowly across the car wash lot. Its headlights swept over Bay 4, hung on the empty running truck, then slid toward my window. I watched the officer frown, park by the entrance, and climb carefully out. I stepped outside before he reached the door and blurted everything out. That a customer had paid cash, driven to Bay 4, sprayed once, then disappeared while his truck idling. I told him I checked the truck, found keys and a work bag, then walked the bays, the bathrooms, and behind the building yelling, but saw nobody and heard nothing. He looked past me at the bay, then pointed up at the camera by the entrance and asked if it worked. I said yes, it fed into some monitoring company. He nodded and said that was exactly why they were there, because the system had flagged strange movement in a zone behind the building where people rarely went at night. He told me to go back into the booth, close the door, stay there, and let him walk the property alone, in case this was more serious than it looked. I stepped inside and was reaching for my phone again, when an engine roared around the far corner, louder than his cruiser, and we snapped our heads toward the sound. The dark pickup shot out from behind the building, tires squealing on concrete, no headlights. Then they flashed on as he aimed straight for the exit toward the highway ahead. The officer shouted for me to stay inside and sprinted to his car, lights flipping on as he pulled out, but the truck was already hitting the road and disappearing. After a few minutes, he came back alone, parked by the booth, and told me the guy had been hiding on the back wall the whole time, outside my sight. He said my walking around and yelling had messed up whatever the man planned, so he waited until the search moved away from him and used that distraction to bolt. He pulled out a notepad, wrote everything down, then had me describe the man and the truck, the buzz cut, the work jacket, the older dark pickup, any plate numbers. After he took my name and number, he said I could go home, that a detective might call, and that this probably connected to something else they had been working. The next afternoon, a detective called and told me the man from the car wash matched their suspect in a string of attacks on workers at 24-hour businesses. He said that over the past 3 weeks, the guy had robbed 2 store clerks and a gas station attendant, all on late shifts, each one beaten during the robbery. I stared at the wall while he talked, thinking about how I had walked the place shouting for the guy, not realizing I was looking for someone who hurt me. The detective said my moving fast, searching right away, and yelling probably threw him off his plan, and the unexpected patrol car showing up sealed his decision to back out. That night I called my boss, told him I was done. He said it was, they'd add cameras and have police, but I refused and told him to mail paycheck. Now when I think about that night, I picture that open truck door and realize one guy needing extra money almost became another victim working alone out there that night. About 6 months ago, I had this thing happen that I still can't fully explain. I work as an HVAC maintenance technician at Martin State Airport near Baltimore. My shift runs 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most days are the same. Finish the last ticket, walk the mechanical rooms, kill the lights, lock the technical zone, then cross to the employee lot and drive home in my Subaru Outback. I'm 35, I like routine, and that morning started like any other. It was a cold Tuesday morning in November, around 40 degrees, thick fog so visibility was maybe 60 feet. I remember checking the wall clock in the shop, seeing a little after 6, signing the log and putting my tools away. Inside the terminal, it was that dead quiet between the last red-eye and the first commuters. Outside, the employee lot was almost empty. My Subaru was in the far corner by the fence. I had my keys in my hand, head down, walking toward it when someone stepped out of the fog to my right. A woman came out from between 2 parked cars and stopped in the lane. Mid-40s, dark gray wool coat, black pants, low heels, hair pulled back neat. She looked like business class, not airport maintenance. She raised a hand a bit and called, "Excuse me, sir, do you work here?" and pointed at the terminal. Her voice was calm, like she'd asked that question a lot. I said, "Yeah, HVAC," and walked closer. That's when I noticed a thin chain around her neck with a small blue badge resting on her coat. It had the airport logo, blue background, white lettering, looked like one of our IDs in an older format. That made me relax a little. In my head, she went from random person in the fog to someone from admin who worked late. She gave this tight little smile and said her car battery was completely dead. She couldn't get it to start, and asked if I had jumper cables. Normally, I'd point people to the 24-hour security post up front, since they handle that stuff. But I hesitated. She looked around the empty lot, hugged her coat tighter, and for some reason that got to me. I thought about my sister walking out alone to a dead car in the dark. Between that and the badge, telling her to hike back to security felt like a jerk move. So I said, "Yeah, I've got cables. I'll pull my car over." I walked to my Subaru, unlocked it, popped the hatch, grabbed the jumper cable bag I keep for winter emergencies, then started the engine and drove over to where she pointed. Her car was a gray Toyota Camry parked 3 rows in from my usual spot, facing out. Clean, no dents, looked like a standard company sedan. I parked nose to nose, set the brake, popped my hood, and told her I'd hook everything up if she popped hers. She opened the driver door, sat down, and I heard the click of the release lever from inside. When I looked back, her hood was still flat. She came out again, gave this quick shrug and said, "Lever sticks sometimes, old car," like she'd said it before. I walked around to the front, slid my hand under the edge of the hood, found the safety latch almost immediately, pushed it, and the hood came up smooth. No sticking at all. I noticed it, but it was 6 in the morning and I was half asleep, so I just set the prop and opened my own hood the rest of the way. I clamped red to her positive, then mine, black to my negative, then the last black to a metal bracket on her engine, away from the battery. Textbook setup, no sparks. "Go ahead and start it," I said. She turned the key. It clicked twice, then caught on the 3rd try and idled smooth, weirdly quick for a dead battery. I pulled the clamps off, shut both hoods, threw the cables in my trunk, then went to her window. She rolled it halfway down and I told her, "All set, just drive around 20 minutes, don't shut it off yet." She thanked me, didn't ask where to go, just stayed behind the wheel, looking at me through the windshield with a slight smile. I walked back to my car, got in, closed the door and started the engine. I adjusted the rearview mirror out of habit. Her Camry was still in the same place. Engine running, headlights on, and she was sitting straight behind the wheel, not moving. I figured she was giving it a minute so it would not stall again. It was not that cold, most people would just drive off. I put my Subaru in gear and headed toward the exit. While I turned, her headlights moved too. I told myself we were just leaving at the same time. At the barrier, I swiped my pass, watched it go up, and checked the mirror. She had stopped right behind me, closer than people normally do in an almost empty lot. I pulled onto the main road and turned right, same way I always go home. A few seconds later, she pulled out and turned right too. The road was mostly empty. I kept my speed normal and tried to ignore it. After about a mile, I looked up and saw she was still in my lane, about the same distance behind. I kept checking the mirror. 2 miles, same thing. 3 miles, fog lifting, and her car was still there. Same lane, same gap. No lane changes, no turn-offs. That was when my heart really started pounding. My hands were sweating on the wheel. It did not feel like random traffic anymore. I started running through possibilities. Maybe she thought I had damaged her car. Maybe she had a weapon and was waiting until we got somewhere with no witnesses. Maybe she was just unstable. Whatever the reason, I did not want her behind me all the way to my street. That part was very clear. Up ahead, there's a small side road that cuts over to an industrial area, just warehouses and truck yards. I never use it coming home. I hit my blinker and turned onto it. If she kept going straight, I would know it was nothing. In the mirror, I watched her. She turned in right after me without even tapping the brakes. That killed the coincidence idea completely. The industrial road is straight and empty. I pressed the gas and let the Subaru climb. 60, then faster, around 80 on the straight stretch. Her headlights stayed where they were, not closing in, not fading. My pulse was pounding. Finally, I decided I was done letting her control the situation. I slammed the brakes and stopped on the shoulder. I sat there a couple seconds, then told myself I should at least try to find out why. Maybe the car really was acting up and she was scared to stop alone. I stepped out, walked a couple of steps into the lane and looked back. Her Camry was about 150 feet behind me, stopped, pointed straight at me. I raised one hand, like, what is going on? Her reverse lights came on. She rolled back, slow and steady, until she had opened another big gap between us. Then she stopped again. No horn, no window, just that space she wanted. Standing there, it hit me that walking all the way back was a bad idea. I turned around, got in my car, and shut the door with my hands shaking. I pulled my phone to call 911, but before I dialed, she signaled, made a U-turn, and disappeared. Later, I called airport security. Cameras showed the Camry stolen, tied to an Airbnb, her badge fake, and no one could explain why. The camera fell into my lap when I pulled the tent stake. I stared at it for a few seconds before I understood what I was holding. This bark-colored trail cam with a dead little eye, aimed straight at my tent door where I slept every night. That was wrong. I looked up and saw the broken zip tie still hanging from the branch. Someone had mounted it there on purpose. Someone had been watching me sleep, change clothes, eat, for 3 days. There was a memory card inside. What the police later showed me from it still haunts me. I am a wildlife photographer, 28, and I spend more time in the backcountry than in my own apartment. I know how to hang a bear bag, read a map, stay calm. I work alone by choice. I have never been truly scared out there until this trip before. I drove out to the Blue Ridge section of North Carolina in early September for a week-long shoot of nocturnal animals. The spot looked perfect on satellite images. 5 miles from the nearest dirt road, dense forest, a dry creek bed for camp. I hiked in Tuesday afternoon alone. I set my pack down, did a slow loop to check for dead limbs, trash, or other camps, then pitched my tent in the creek bed flat. Bear bag went up on a good limb, stove stayed well away, and all scented stuff went into one dry bag before dark. The first 2 nights were exactly what I wanted. I left camp around 10, worked with a red headlamp and 2 camera bodies until 3 or 4, then stumbled back, ate something, and crashed. No voices, no engines, just animals and my own footsteps in the leaf litter out there. On the morning of day 3, I crawled out of my tent, stretched, and walked to the fire ring. My enamel mug, which I always leave on the left, was sitting upright on a rock on the right. My pack's main zipper was open halfway. 1 energy bar was missing. I checked the ground for tracks or claw marks, but there was nothing, just my boot prints and some deer sign. I did a slow circle, listening. Everything sounded normal. My hand went to the bear spray on my hip anyway. I told myself I was just exhausted and sloppy. I re-zipped the pack, checked my cameras, lenses, and satellite messenger, and everything else was exactly where I had left it. People cut through these woods sometimes. Maybe somebody had wandered by while I was out shooting. If I kept obsessing, I knew I would blow the whole trip. That 3rd evening, I hiked about 2 miles to an outcrop where I had spotted a family of flying squirrels. I shot them gliding for a few hours and tried not to think about the mug. Around 12:30, it started raining, so I packed up and headed back early. The hike back was flat to the creek bed where my camp sat. When I was 30 meters out, I switched my headlamp from red to white so I would not trip on a guy line. The beam swung across the trees and landed on a man beside my tent. He was lean, mid-30s, standing on my side of the vestibule like he had been going through my gear. The second he heard my boots on the rocks, he spun toward the light. I caught a pale face, dark hair, no mask, and then he bolted into the trees. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the rain and my breathing. Every instinct said back away. But everything I owned was in that tent, including my keys and Sat Messenger. Running blind in the dark did not feel safer. I circled wide toward the door. Zipper pulls were together outside. He had closed my tent before running. I opened it and swept my light. My sleeping bag was unrolled, backpack on its side, cameras still there. But my knife and cookies were gone. My hands shook so bad I could barely zip the tent closed. I sat awake all night with bear spray in my hand and all 3 flashlights on. I lined them up by my sleeping bag, one on my head, one in my left hand, one beside my knee. Every sound outside, branches shifting, leaves brushing, wind changing, made my body tense up. I kept telling myself it was just an opportunistic thief, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that guy's face in my beam. Around 3, I started checking the time every few minutes. I kept the tent zipped and my boots on, sat half-propped against my backpack. A couple of times I thought I heard footsteps in the leaves, but when I held my breath and really listened, there was nothing clear, just forest noise. By 4, my hands hurt from gripping the spray cans so tight. I must have dozed off sitting upright. I remember checking my watch at 4:52 and then jerking awake to full sunlight burning through the tent wall. My neck was stiff and my legs were numb. The second I realized it was morning, one thought hit me over everything else. Get out. Leave now. Don't overthink it. Normally I break camp in a really specific order so I don't lose gear. That morning I just started cramming things into my pack, no system, not even brushing dirt off. I stuffed my sleeping bag, shoved clothes on top, broke down the stove with shaking fingers. I kept stopping to listen, expecting to hear someone walking up on me. When I stepped out to collapse the tent, I did one fast circle of the camp. Nothing looked disturbed from the night before. No new boot prints, no trash, nothing. That almost made it worse, because it meant whoever that guy was, he could be 10 yards away watching and I would have no idea. I pulled the poles, then yanked the last guy line out of the ground. When the stake popped free, something dropped from above with a soft thud right next to my boot. I jumped back, grabbed the bear spray, then saw it was just a camera. I bent down and picked it up. It was a professional trail camera, bark-colored casing, infrared sensor on the front, memory card slot on the side. The lens was pointed exactly toward the spot where my tent had been set up. Someone hadn't just wandered by. They had planned this. I looked up and saw a nylon zip tie looped around a branch, one end still dangling where it had snapped when I pulled the guy line. My brain flipped from fear to something closer to anger. I pulled out my phone, took a clear photo of the branch and the broken tie, then a couple of the camera in my hand. After that, I shoved the camera deep into my pack between my clothes and tripod. I threw the rest of my gear on top without checking twice and shouldered the pack. The hike back that had taken me more than an hour on the way in went by in what felt like minutes. I didn't really hike. I power walked, almost jogged, checking over my shoulder every few seconds. I didn't stop to rest, didn't stop to drink, just moved. When the trees thinned, and I finally saw the dirt road and my car, my legs felt rubbery. I dropped the pack by the back bumper, fumbled the keys, got the doors unlocked, and then it hit me all at once. My stomach turned and I had to lean over into the bushes and throw up. It wasn't sickness. It was like my body finally realized we were safe enough to fall apart. 2 hours later, I was in the Asheville Ranger Station with the camera sitting on the metal desk between us. Ranger McBride, a middle-aged guy in a green uniform shirt, turned it over in his hands and frowned. "This isn't ours," he said. "We don't mount anything that deep without letting people know." He opened the battery compartment, powered it on, and scrolled through the tiny menu. 47 files on here, he said. His face got more serious. "I'm going to call the county sheriff. This is above my pay grade." A deputy showed up, introduced himself, and asked me to walk through everything from when I parked my car to when I found the camera. I went over it step by step. He typed while I talked, only stopping to clarify times or directions. When I finished, he asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I told him yes, absolutely. They bagged the camera as evidence and said they'd be in touch. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, just the road and my own breathing. Every time a car stayed behind me more than a minute, I checked the mirror over and over until it turned off. Logically, I knew the guy from the woods probably had no idea who I was or where I lived, but logic didn't help much that day. A week later, Detective Granger called my cell and asked if I could meet him at a coffee shop in town. When I got there, he was already at a corner table with a plain laptop bag at his feet. He showed me his badge, then opened the laptop and turned it toward me. The screen was full of thumbnail images, grid after grid of my campsite. "Your footage is here," he said quietly. 3 days like you said. You sleeping, changing, cooking, all time-stamped. He clicked a few, and my own face popped up, blurred a little from the low light, but still clearly me. He paused, then scrolled down. "But there are 2 more sets," he went on. "July and August this year. 2 other women, roughly your age. Same forest area, within 5 miles of where you camped. One set is 4 days of footage, the other is 6 days." I felt this cold spread through my chest. He kept talking. They had managed to contact both women from gear markings and a custom patch on one woman's pack. Both confirmed they had been out there on those dates, both solo. Neither had noticed cameras or missing items. One told him she had felt watched out there but assumed she was just being paranoid and tired. He finally closed the laptop and looked at me. "Someone's hunting solo women in that area," he said. "Systematically. You 3 got lucky he only watched. So far." He slid a card across the table. "If you remember anything else, anything at all, call me. And don't go out there alone again for a while. I still take photos for a living, but I plan every trip differently now. I send exact locations to friends, share my live position, double-check every branch and tree around where I sleep. I know the odds of running into that same guy again are low, and maybe they'll catch him someday, but none of that changes what it feels like to know I was a target. I still can't sleep in a room with open curtains,